is the last day of April. Like May of 2023 is tomorrow. And that feels really weird. But also, like, there's a thing that happens in May to almost everyone's schedule, is that you kind of have a regular rhythm throughout the year, and then May hits. Most people think their schedule goes crazy in June, like when the summer gets here. No, it's May. Because in May, you get Mother's Day, and you get graduations, and there's a Memorial Day weekend in there, and everybody's schedule just starts to go crazy in May. And church is no different, to be honest. We've got some really exciting things coming up that I kind of want to get out in front of you ahead of time, just because I know in the next few weeks things start to go crazy and it's hard to keep track of things. So a couple things I want to let you know about real quick before we jump into the sermon today. The first one is coming up in just a few weeks on May 21st, we're going to have a class called Starting Point. And what that is if you're new to Gateway, maybe you've been coming for a month or a couple months, or maybe this is your first time here or your second time or something like that, and you're kind of curious, like you want to know a little bit more about the church, like, okay, I've been here on a Sunday morning, I've maybe watched online, I've kind of gotten an idea of what happens on Sunday morning, but you want to know a little bit more about the church as a whole, and like what are some of the things that we believe, and how is like our leadership structured, and all that kind of stuff. You want to know more about like the DNA of our church, like what really makes us tick. Starting Point is the place for you. So on May 21st, right after church, we're going to have a class called Starting Point. It's about 2 hours long. We're going to serve you lunch. We'll have childcare available if we need it. But it's an opportunity for you, if you're new to Gateway, to come and to learn more, to ask questions is one of the big things. We love to have you ask whatever questions that you might have, and we'll tell you about like kind of the heartbeat that God has given us as a church. And so it's an exciting time. We'd love for you to be there for that. If you're interested in that, you'll get an email later this week with information about that if we have your contact information. If we don't, fill out one of those Connect cards that are on the ends of the rows around you. You can drop it in the offering plate on your way out. You can drop it at the Welcome Center, and we'd be glad to add you to that. But Starting Point's a great way to get to know the church, but it's also kind of a pathway to membership, as maybe you've been attending for a little bit and you're like, I might want to place membership and kind of like formally say, yeah, this is my church, this is my family. Then Starting Point is the way to do that. So I needed to let you know about that. And then the other thing that I want to let you know about is just a couple of weeks after that, June 5th through the 9th, is going to be our VBS this year, is that we moved it up quite a bit. Last year was kind of towards the end of the summer. This year we're going to do it right away, beginning of June. And so if you've got kids, you've got grandkids, you've got neighbor kids, you know some kids, that is the thing that you want to make sure that they know about. Invite them to it. It's absolutely free. It's 5 days long, June 5th through the 9th, Monday through Friday in the evening. It's going to be a great time. You'll see some sign-up links and stuff pop up on our Church Center app later this week and on social media as well. So like I said, if you got kids, you know some kids, make sure you let them know about VBS. And of course, we're always going to be looking for volunteers for that as well. And so we'll get you information about that and the opportunities there. So there's lots going on, and we're almost to summer. You can almost feel it. It's starting. The weather's teasing you. It's never going to get there. It'll get there eventually. But anyways, let's go ahead and let's pray, and we'll jump into what we're doing today. God, we love you. We thank you for the opportunity to dive into your word now. And so, God, as we take a look at the life of Jacob and we dig into kind of a really special event, a really special time, an encounter that he has with you, as we look at that today, God, would you open our hearts? So would you help us to put away all the distractions, all the things that went on this week that were good or that were bad, that our minds might be on? God, would you just give us a small pocket of time this morning to focus on you and your word, God, as you speak to us today? We love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, so when I was growing up, my dad had a 1946 Plymouth, and it sat in our garage, and it didn't run. It had been his grandpa, so my great-grandpa, it had been his car. And my dad, when my great-grandpa passed away, my dad bought the car from his estate. And like I said, it didn't run. This thing just sat in our garage and took up space for pretty much my entire childhood. And my dad would go through different spurts where he'd work on it for a few months. His goal was to like restore it. He wanted to get it running. He wanted to like shine it up real nice. Maybe even enter it in some car shows eventually. But all I remember of it was this thing that meant we couldn't park our real cars in the garage because it was always there taking up space. And like I said, my dad he'd work on it from time to time, and sometimes he would ask my sister or I to come out and help him, and sometimes it was like holding a light so that he could see under the car, or it was, step on the brake, and we'd step on the brake, and he'd be doing something under I don't know what he's doing, or sometimes it was just as simple as like, hey, can you hand me this tool, and I remember some afternoons just like laying under the car with him, pretending I know what he's doing, and just being in there with my dad as he's working on this car. And one of the things that I like to do was just to be around him when he was working on this car. And I remember one particular day in particular, Dad's laying under the car. I don't know what he's doing. He's making a lot of noise. Like he's hitting something. There's this loud noise coming from underneath. And I thought that sounded like fun, and I wanted to participate. So I found a hammer that was laying nearby and thought, you know what, I'm going to help as well. But I knew that could cause some damage, so I knew to be gentle. So I started out just like real lightly tapping on the side of the car just to make a little noise. I just wanted to participate. Dad didn't say anything. I figured, okay, that was safe. I didn't do anything. So, and I just kind of started making my way around the car, tapping here and there. After about 10 minutes or so, every single one of the windows in each car door, of the 4 car doors, had cracks in it because I had taken that hammer to the window. I hadn't like spider webbed it, hadn't busted it, but I had cracked it pretty significantly. And you can imagine my dad was not very happy when he got out from under the car. He was pretty upset. And I don't remember exactly what he said to me in that moment, except for one thing. I remember one thing, and this is something that I've heard many times throughout my life, but this is the first time I ever remember hearing it. And I always hear it in my head now in my dad's voice. This is what he said. He said, "Come on, man, you know better than that." And that, like I said, that was the first time I ever heard it, but it stuck with me. And to be fair, okay, I didn't know that it would happen. I knew that it could happen, but I didn't think that it would happen until it actually did. And it was after that it did happen that, I agreed with my dad. I could look back and say, yeah, I did know better. I should have known better. Like I said, that became a voice that replayed inside my head and continues to replay inside my head. Every time I come across something in life where I made a mistake, I did something wrong, and I look on it, and I just go, man, I knew better than that. I know better than that. Why did I do that? Now, don't get me wrong. My dad was a great dad, and I'm so thankful for both my parents who raised me to know the Lord. There was a lot of talk in my childhood growing up about how God wanted us to live, and that was great because it formed me in some really, really important ways. But another thing that it did, and you know this if you grew up in a house like that, is that it also creates a certain expectation upon you and within yourself and within others. And when you fail to meet a specific like behavioral expectation or something like that, there's just a little bit more on it. Like there's a little bit more to it because you know inside that you didn't just fail to do something that you knew you should do. You didn't just fail yourself or your parents or some of the other people around you maybe. There's a real sense in which it feels like you failed God. That you didn't just know better, you knew the best. You knew the best standard that was there, but you also didn't think it would happen. And you only knew that it could happen a certain way until it did happen. In fact, that's how most of your biggest regrets in life started out. You see, looking back, most of your biggest mistakes, now I'm not talking about the things that happened to you that you had no control over, but I'm talking about the things that you can look back on and say, yeah, I played an active role in that. Most of those are things that you could look back on and say, I knew better. Like I knew that was a bad decision. I just didn't think it would go the way that it actually did, but I knew the potential was there. I knew better. You knew what could happen if you said yes. You knew that drugs were dangerous. You knew that the person that you were trying to hang around was bad news. You knew that your mama had told you not to do this. Like you knew all those things. Now, a lot of times we look back at the greatest failures in our life, and we can see that we should have known better, and maybe we did know better. And now, so often, part of our life is now dealing with the fallout of these choices that we made when we should have known better. And this is what we see in the life of Jacob. That all throughout Jacob's life, you see over and over and over him making these mistakes and the ramifications that it has on the rest of his life. We're in week 3 of this series. We've been calling it Faith with a Limp. And we've been looking at the life of Jacob. And I love looking at the life of Jacob because I see in Jacob, when I see him, I see my story. I see a guy who made way too many mistakes in life, and most of them should have known better. See, Jacob should have known better. See, if you look at Jacob's story, what we've looked at so far, there's some things that we know. One, that Jacob was born into a family of faith. He was raised on stories of God communicating with and providing for and promising things to his dad and to his grandpa. And there was even a special promise made by God to his parents just before Jacob was born. And so Jacob has been raised not only knowing that God is with his family, but that God is specifically with him. That God had given this blessing saying that Jacob would be the favored child, that he would be the one to lead the family in the future, that he'd be the one to gain this great inheritance. And yet, even knowing that God has this plan for him, Jacob kind of takes things into his own hands. And we saw that the last couple of weeks. He cons his brother out of his inheritance. And then he just straight up lies to steal his brother Esau's blessing, that blessing from the father that designated him as like the next head of the family. And it's not like Jacob didn't know that he shouldn't be doing all this stuff. He was raised in a family of faith. And yet up to this point in Jacob's life, the only time Jacob mentions God is as part of a lie that he's telling his father as he's trying to steal this blessing from his brother. He's been living life up until this point in the story. Jacob has been living life his own way, and he's only been using God to justify himself rather than actually listening to the things that God would have him do. And today we see it finally catch up with him. Kind of. You'll see what I mean. So we're in Genesis chapter 28 today. We're going to be beginning in verse 10. And so as we jump into that, so we're right at the end of that blessing being stolen story, the story where Jacob steals the blessing from his brother Esau. And his brother, understandably, is furious. He's so upset that Jacob has done this to him that he vows to kill him. Basically says, hey, as soon as dad passes away, I'm coming for him. Like, I'm going to hunt him down, and I'm going to kill him. And so Jacob's mom and Esau's mom, she hears about this, and she tells Jacob, hey, man, you got to get out of Dodge because he's gonna come for you. And so Rebecca and Isaac, Jacob's parents, they tell him, hey, head up to your uncle's place and just kind of ride things out. Live with him for a while. Ride things out until maybe your brother, he'll kind of calm down. Maybe while you're up there, you can find a wife and kind of begin your life. And so Jacob does. He takes off, and he doesn't take anything with him. And so when we pick things up in Genesis 28, verse 10, Jacob's just recognize where he's at. He's afraid for his life. He is living on the run with no support, worried that his brother is going to be coming after him. He doesn't know this yet, but he's never going to see his mom again. All because of a series of bad decisions that he made that he should have known better. He's cheated, he has deceived, he has swindled his way into exactly the position he wanted, and throughout that whole time, he's been raised hearing that God wanted these things for him as well. But he did it all according to his own plan and on his own time and in his own way, and he has just made a train wreck of his life up until this point. And you've been there. You've been there. You took that job, or you didn't take that job, or you dove into a relationship, or you neglected a relationship, or maybe you even convinced yourself that you were in a situation where you were doing God's will when the reality was that you had not actually even been engaging in a relationship with him. And now things have begun to unravel, and you don't know why. And you're frustrated, and you're angry. That's where Jacob is. He doesn't understand what's going on. He just knows life has fallen apart around him. And that's where we pick it up in verse 10. Look at this. Genesis 28, verse 10. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Now, that doesn't sound too exciting so far, but there's actually some really important details in those couple sentences right there that we don't want to miss. There's two words, and I kind of highlighted them on the screen. It says that Jacob reached a certain place. And then we read that, and it's not that exciting. But in the Hebrew, it means something actually really, really specific. That word we translate as reached, it's the Hebrew verb pagah. It literally means to fall upon something. So he falls upon this place. It literally means, like, the idea is that Jacob has stumbled upon this place that he finds himself. There's no intent there. He wasn't, like, specifically trying to find this place. He just happens to end up there. But this isn't just a place. In the Hebrew, this is the place. That's why we translate it as a certain place. It's a very specific location. See, the narrator, as he's writing this story down, he's highlighting something specific, and this is what he's highlighting, is that God knew what he was doing, but Jacob didn't. See, when Jacob, he's running, he's on the run, he's in this difficult situation in life, and he just happens to end up in this place, so he thinks. He feels like he's in uncharted territory. He feels like his life has gotten flipped upside down, and he doesn't know why. But what we're about to see is that God not only knows, but he's actually been waiting for this exact moment to speak into Jacob's life. And this simple concept is so important for us to grasp, for you and I. See, when you're in that uncomfortable place where you're asking in life, oh, okay, what is going on? Why are things just falling apart? You are exactly where God knew that you would be. It's not necessarily where he wanted you to be. I think if you're there as a result of some bad choices you made, I think God would even say, yeah, I wish you hadn't chosen that. Like, I had a better way for you. You didn't choose it. So it's not that God has you, like, where he wants you, but you are where he knew you would be. He's not surprised. And that should give you peace. Because it should give you peace because of what we see happen next. Because of what we see God do when Jacob is in the place. The next verse, verse 11, continuing on there. It says, taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. So basically, Jacob's got nothing. He doesn't even have extra clothes with him that he can ball up and make a pillow. He's got nothing. He lays his head on a rock, goes to sleep. Verse 12. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Maybe you've heard this before described as Jacob's ladder. The word in Hebrew actually describes more of a staircase, is a better translation. I'm glad our Bibles that we're reading today say stairway. See, it's a much better translation because it's a very specific term referring to, like, a stepped ramp that leads to something, like the kind that you would find on what's called an ancient ziggurat. And we'll talk more about what a ziggurat was in a little while. So just kind of file that away, that idea that there's this stairway that exists on the side of a thing called a ziggurat. That'll be important later. So Jacob sees this. That's what he's seeing in his dream. He sees this stairway, and he sees angels coming and going up and down this staircase. That's important later. Verse 13, we'll keep going. There, above it, so above this stairway, stood the Lord. Above it stood the Lord. Again, in the Hebrew, there's some interesting nuances here. This word that we translate as above, it could be translated two ways, and biblical scholars honestly are, like, split right down the middle on how this should be translated. That a lot of scholars would translate it the way the NIV does here, saying that it means above the, meaning above the stairway. The other way that many people translate it, and it's your Bibles, if you have a different version, is that some translate it as beside him, meaning not above the ladder, but beside him, beside Jacob. And I think that beside him, beside Jacob, is the better choice. To be honest, it fits with the rest of the narrative. It fits with the rest of the story much better. A little bit later in verse 16, Jacob's going to say, after this encounter with God, he's going to say, surely the Lord is in this place, not that place, not up there. He's saying this place here. He's here. He's not up there. So anyways, that'll mean more in a little bit. So God shows up in Jacob's dream, and he portrays himself not as up there, but as right here next to him. And now he's going to speak to Jacob. He's going to say something to him. And this is where we would expect, like in all of us as we're listening to this, and we know Jacob's background, we know his life up to this point, we would expect a tongue lashing. We would expect, come on, man, you know better than this. Remember, this is Jacob. Up until this point in his life, there has been no evidence that he has a relationship with God. He has grown up hearing about God, and he's grown up hearing that God has a great plan for his life, but he's never actually engaged him in relationship. He believes that God exists. He's even leveraged God's name to get what he wants, but he's never pursued any relationship with him. And now, God has showed up literally right next to him, and we are ready to listen to God just kind of rip him apart. Because this is what he deserves. We know how selfish that he's been. So does God. And so we're ready to hear about like maybe some curses to the third and fourth generation that we're expecting to come down on Jacob here. And to be honest, it can catch you a little off guard. It's a little disconcerting that nothing but love and grace and promises flow from God's mouth. Look at what God says to him in verse 13. Then from above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. All peoples of the earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. He basically comes to him and he says, hey, you know that God that you've been hearing about your whole life from your dad and your grandpa? That's me. Hi. And you know that great plan for your life that you've been hearing about from your mom and your dad for your entire life, you remember that? All those blessings, that's still on the table. Like life is not looking good for you right now, but it's still a possibility. And actually, what I want to do for you, Jacob, is actually a lot more than doing just something for you, but it's actually doing something through you, something that's going to end up blessing the entire world, the people all over the earth from every nation. He's telling me, hey, Jacob, I want your life to be about so much more than just you. And then he finishes out this promise to Jacob by telling him exactly how all of this is going to come about. And this is so important. Look at this. Verse 15, God continues, and he says, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you. That's a lot of eyes. It says, I'm with you. I will watch over you. I'll bring you back. I will not leave until I have done what I have promised. He's saying, Jacob, stop doing things your way. Just be in relationship with me. Let me take care of you. See, that blessing, this blessing from God that Jacob has been grasping for his entire life. He's telling him, look, it's not going to come through your effort, Jacob. It's not going to come through your plans of how to get this. But it's going to come through a relationship with the living God. And that's a God who's not angry. See, we often have this caricature of what we think God is like, especially when it comes to stories in the Old Testament. We think that God is like this mean, bloodthirsty tyrant who almost enjoys like steamrolling sinners with plagues and fire and holes that open up in the ground and swallow people up. We think that God is out to punish anyone who steps out of line. And to be honest, hey, the next time you are tempted to think of God that way, remember how he treats Jacob right here in Genesis 28. Jacob deserved to be punished. He deserved God to show up and to chastise him and to discipline him. He had earned nothing but punishment. And yet when God comes down within like boot-stomping distance of Jacob, he speaks words of blessing and promise, showing nothing but mercy and extending the offer to him, an offer of relationship with himself, an offer of relationship with the living God. So Jacob responds, verse 16. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Now this is so cool right here. Like, it may not sound very cool, but let me give you a little bit of background. Remember when I mentioned earlier about ziggurats, that they were these giant structures that had a staircase going up on the outside of this big structure. There was a staircase going all the way up to the top. It was this massive, really tall, kind of like almost like a pyramid, but kind of tiered like steps on the way up. And it had this big staircase going up the side. And at the top of this staircase, there was always a room at the top. There was like a square or a rectangular building at the top that had one single room in it, and that room at the top was called the house of God. And so what it was the ancient people, not Israelites, but all of the ancient people in that part of the world at that time, they all had this common belief that they could build these ziggurats and that it was a place where the gods would enter into our physical world from their spiritual realm. And that house at the top, that house of God, was the house where the God would stay when he came into the world. It was the path that the entire structure was often referred to as a stairway. It was the path between the divine and the earthly realms. And people could climb it. You could climb up the steps, and people would do that, and they would leave gifts or offerings in the house of God at the top. And so Jacob has this dream, and this is what he's seeing. This is the description of what he's seeing. This is the vocabulary, the Hebrew vocabulary, all points to this is the idea that he has in his head as he sees one of these structures, and he sees angels coming and going on it. And then God shows up right next to him. And so Jacob wakes up from his dream. He says, this is that place. He's at a place that he's going to rename Bethel. There is no ziggurat there. There's nothing there, but he says, no, this is the place. And it's not this is the gate of heaven, not because of any structure that it's there, but this is the gate of heaven because this is where God showed up. This is where God met me. But it's not up there. It's right here with me. And it's really interesting. Fast forward a couple thousand years to the life of Jesus. Early in Jesus' ministry, he's kind of calling his first followers to him. And one of the guys he calls is a man named Philip. And Philip begins to believe that Jesus is the Messiah that the entire Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, had been teaching about. He believes that Jesus is this long-awaited Messiah. And so he tells another guy named Nathaniel about Jesus. He tells him about this rabbi named Jesus from a town called Nazareth. And Nathaniel, he's skeptical. He's skeptical because he's from Nazareth. I know Nazareth. There's nothing special about Nazareth. Nothing good comes out of Nazareth. And Philip just says, well, just come and see. And so Philip takes Nathaniel to meet Jesus. And this is what happens when they meet. John chapter 1, verse 47. It says, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching him, he said, here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. That word deceit is pretty important. Let's go back to the story of Jacob. Do you remember Jacob's name, what it means? Two things. It means heel grabber, but then it also means deceitful. And so Jesus sees Nathanael coming, and he says basically to him, hey, there's an Israelite. You're an Israelite in whom there is no Jacob. You are a genuine person who is genuinely seeking God, and you're not grasping for all these things on your own. And he basically pays him the compliment. Then he goes on, verse 48. How do you know me? Nathanael asked. Jesus answered, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." Then Nathanael declared, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." Jesus said, "You believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. You will see even greater things than that." So that they have this exchange where Jesus basically said, "Hey, yeah, I saw you when you were under the fig tree," and it must have been something like completely private that nobody could have seen Nathanael. And so immediately Nathanael's going, okay, there's something different about this guy. And he goes very quickly from nothing good comes out of Nazareth to you're the Son of God. And he makes this transition. And so Jesus responds to him. He's like, man, if you think that's something, you're going to see something even better. And then he says one last thing to him in verse 51. He then added, "Very truly I tell you, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." Jesus he's referring to that stairway, that house of God, that gate of heaven that Jacob saw back in his dream. And he's basically telling him, hey, that stairway where the angels were coming and going, kind of doing God's bidding in the world, they're bringing messages to and about God. That stairway, that's not a stairway, that's me. He's saying it's not a pathway, that it's a person. It's not the gateway to the divine, the gateway to a relationship with God. It's not a ladder that you have to climb. It's not some set of tasks that have to be done in order for you to work your way up to God. He's saying, look, Jesus himself, I am that pathway. And no amount of doing stuff is going to get you anywhere. But a relationship with me, a relationship with Jesus, a real relationship with a real God who descended from heaven into humanity to live not up there away from us, but with us, next to us. God had engaged Jacob in a relationship like that. And this is Jacob's response back in Genesis 28, verse 18. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. He names it Bethel, which means house of God. And this becomes a really important place throughout Scripture. It's a place that later in Jacob's life, actually, God is going to lead him back to about 20 years later. Keep going, verse 20. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I'm taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God." Now, a lot of people read this and they think, like, Jacob still doesn't get it. He's bargaining with God. Like, God just showed up and he's saying, well, okay, if you'll do this and this. And I want to challenge you, don't read it that way. That it's not read as like okay, God, if you'll do those things, then I'll do this. A better way to read this is really as if Jacob is saying, okay, since you're going to do this. Okay, because God has already promised that he's going to do those things. We read it in the verses a little bit earlier. He's saying, okay, since you're going to do all that, then okay, yeah, you'll be my God. He's not bartering with God. And because God has initiated a relationship with him, Jacob responds not just with words, but with actions. Look at verse 22. "And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth." Jacob does two specific things in response. The first one is he sets up this pillar, that stone that he had been sleeping on. He sets it up as a stone to kind of mark the place, to mark this milestone in his life, this spiritual milestone, this place where God did something amazing in his life, as a way to remember, as a way to be able to look back and to say that when people would come and visit that place, they would see this stone and they would say, why is that there? And then that would be the impetus for someone to tell the story of how God showed up and engaged with Jacob. See, don't forget what God has done for you. Sometimes we get so caught up in what's coming up next in life. And okay, God, now I need you to do this for me. And would you Would you be with me in this way? And would you do this? And we get so worried about the present or so worried about the future that we forget to look back at God's faithfulness in the past. And the best way to do that is to tell your story. To tell that story over and over again of what God has done for you. If you had a moment in your life where you can look back and you say, at this moment, I knew that God was doing something in my life because the way things worked out, the way God worked in my life, there's no other explanation. So that when those times come, when life goes nuts and you start looking around going, what's going on? I don't understand this. You can look back at that and say, God has been with me. He was with me then, and so I can trust that he's with me now. Tell that story. But then Jacob, he also completely reorients his life around this new relationship with God. For Jacob, that looked like him being generous, by giving a tenth. He rearranged his life financially, some pretty significant financial adjustments. And I want to point out, not about like trying to push any amount of generosity on you, but just saying this, that a real relationship with God involves life change. And it involves life change not as a prerequisite, as something you have to do to be able to climb that ladder to get to God, but it requires life change as a response to the relationship that God has initiated with you. And this sounds great. This sounds awesome. Okay, so God is he wants to show up in our lives next to us, not up there, but down here with us. Sounds good. And we love the idea of Jacob submitting his life to God, and we would love to look at this story and say in the rest of Jacob's life, he was completely devoted to God, and everything went perfectly smoothly, and we didn't have any issues at all. But if you know Jacob's story at all, you know that his struggles continue. He's still a cheat. He's still a deceiver. He never really gets away from those things completely. And yet at this point in his life, now you see God's presence with him throughout his life. That God continues to work in and around Jacob's deceitfulness and his cheating and his scheming to bring blessings into Jacob's life. And it's not because Jacob cleans himself up. He makes a ton more mistakes. And some of those mistakes, as we'll talk about in the coming weeks, they have devastating consequences for him and for his family, things that he cannot escape the consequences of. So what does that mean for you? We look at this episode in Jacob's life. We look at the story of Jacob. What does it mean for us? I love the story of Jacob because, like I said, this is my story. And this is your story. It's the story of someone who wants to follow God, who maybe knows about God, and maybe you were raised in an environment where you were taught about him, or you learned about him, or you heard about him, and you want to follow, but you continue to also want to do it my way. And so how do we respond? Especially when we've been trying to do it our way and we begin to see that life's not working. It's beginning to fall apart around us. Just two quick things. First thing I think we need to do is to recognize that Jesus is with us. Not up there, right beside us, walking with us. And the key to relationship with him is not doing better. It's not checking off boxes. It's not tweaking something here or there in our life. Come on, if you could fix the things that are going wrong in your life by just making little adjustments, you'd have done that a long time ago. If it was that simple, you would have done it a long time ago. See, the key is recognizing that Jesus Christ offers you a relationship with him. He promises his presence with you, and it's only through him that each of us are going to find the peace that we seek. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, it'd be a whole lot easier if God would give me a dream like Jacob. Like if he'd just show up and audibly speak to me, maybe stand next to me, that would be great. Because we hear these Bible stories about God showing up in people's lives and speaking to them. We think, man, if he would just do that for me, that'd be so awesome. That if God would show up for me like that, I'd be devoted. No, you wouldn't. Here's why I say that. This story sounds awesome, and stories like it sound awesome, but the reality is it would be another 20 years before Jacob would hear from God again. 20 years. He's not heard from him before in his life. He has this one short encounter in a dream with him, and it's going to be another 20 years before he hears from God. 20 years of silence, and yet you and I have access to the very words of God through the Scriptures every single day. Jacob didn't have that. The Bible wasn't written yet. Not only do we have God's Word with us every day, we have the Holy Spirit drawing us into relationship with Him. And if we've given our lives to Jesus, living inside of us, dwelling inside of us to guide us each and every day, Jacob would have much rather been in your position than where he was. Jesus Christ is with you, wanting to engage in relationship with you. So we need to recognize that, but we also need to recognize that God's presence and God's blessing, it doesn't come through our own effort, but rather it comes through our surrender. Jacob didn't realize that until he had nothing left, until his decisions had ruined so many things in his life that he had nowhere else to go. Man, don't wait for that. Don't wait for that to happen. Surrender today. We're gonna close out this morning, and we're gonna finish by singing a song, and it's a song that it says, "I will follow." And as we sing through it, it's gonna say, I will follow in all of these different ways. And as we sing that, and maybe today for some of you, today's the day you take your hand off the wheel. That you stop pursuing your own ideas of what a blessed life looks like and surrender control to the God of the universe, who doesn't require you to climb some spiritual ladder to success, but rather who climbs down to us and greets us at the bottom of the ladder with mercy and grace. Let's pray together. Father, we love you so much. We thank you for Jesus. We thank you that God, you gave up heaven to be with us, that you stepped down into the world, into a body, into a human life to live amongst us, not just to be with us for a few years, but so that we could be with you forever. That God, you initiated that relationship with us. So we thank you for Jesus. We thank you for doing that for us, for giving us that opportunity to be with you. But God, we also ask that you would help us to loosen our grip. That it's so hard for us sometimes to not pursue things our way. It's so hard not to grasp for the blessings that we think that we want, or that we know maybe even that you want for us, but to do it our way and in our timing. So God, would you help us to just be submitted to you in every way? God, we love you. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.